Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks again for joining us for Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Get settled in around the fire, and let's see if we can't find some great stories to take us into the weekend. Today's topic of discussion are strange places, especially places to stay. First off, we have a story about an odd hotel room that seems to call to its guests in a way that might be a little bit insidious. So let's hear a story about Room 106.
I had been driving for hours, about 37 of them to be exact, when I saw the sign for the side-of-the-road motel coming up out of the desert like an oasis. I had been laid off from my factory job in California, and when my father had wired me some money for a plane ticket so I could come back to Tennessee, I had decided to rent a car and drive instead. I had flown the first time, but I'd slept most of the flight and hadn't really looked out the window or gotten to experience anything on the way there. The 3 years that I'd been in San Diego had been fun, but I'd mostly just gone to work and gone to bed when I wasn't buying groceries or going out for drinks after work. I had never really had much of a life, telling myself that maybe I would experience something the year after next. And now, it seemed like I had a grand adventure on my hands. I stopped at every little tourist trap along the way, giving myself plenty of time to get to Tennessee, so that I could see whatever I wanted. I'd stayed in Vegas for 3 days, wanting to stay more, but making myself get back on the road. And as I'd driven into the desert, I'd felt like something was waiting up ahead for me. Not like my dad was waiting for me or anything, which he was, but more like there was something holding its breath to see if I would find them out in the desert. The trip from Vegas to the motel in Arizona should have only taken about 8 hours, but I seemed to have gotten lost or turned around somewhere. I drove and drove and drove through the desert, never seeming to get any lower on gas, but definitely feeling the time. I was afraid I was going to have to pull over and get some rest when I saw the motel sign and jumped for joy. I stepped out of my car, and when my foot came down on something, I stepped back a little so I wouldn't break it. I figured it was trash or maybe someone's glasses or something. But it was a cell phone. Not one of the cheap giveaway phones, but it wasn't one of the newest smartphones either. It was a middle-of-the-road iPhone from about 5 years ago, and when I pulled my foot back, the screen blinked weakly before going back into low battery mode. I picked it up, thinking that I might turn it in at the desk and see if someone had lost it. I've always been something of a good Samaritan, and I figured somebody might be glad to have it back. There was no one at the front desk, just an empty checkout and check-in board with a little TV on it that was showing static. I rang the bell and called for help, but nobody came out to see what all the fuss was about. It wasn't late, it was barely 8 o'clock, and as I checked on the desk, I saw that somebody had left a room key sitting on the dusty blotter there. The little tag said it was for room 106. I called a few more times, but when no one answered, I decided I might take the room key and pay them in the morning. Maybe they had left it here in case somebody came in and wanted a room. Maybe they left it there just in case they were sleeping too heavily to check in a guest. It seemed like a great way for someone to use a room and then leave early and not pay anyone. But I suppose people out here are a little more trusting. I reached for the key, but my hand stopped halfway to it. It was like there was a barrier around it, and all the hairs on the back of my hand stood up as my fingers stopped a few inches from the plastic marker. I knew that if I pushed just a little harder, I could grab the key and be done with it, but I didn't really want to. Suddenly, I wanted to get back in my car and leave. Suddenly, I wanted to be anywhere but here. Call it intuition or superstition or whatever you want, but I pulled my hand back and decided to try my luck at the next motel instead. I was awake now, no chance of falling asleep, and it wasn't until I was already back on the road that I remembered I had the cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out, holding it up so I could focus on the road and the phone at the same time, and unlocked it with a flick. Whoever had owned it hadn't set up any of the features that you usually found, like fingerprinting or passcodes, and I was hoping to maybe find a contact list inside, so I could mail it to them, or at least let them know. Every contact I tried to call told me it was out of service, or it was out of working order. And when I tried to dial them on my cell phone, I got the same message. I must be in the dead zone, I thought as I scrolled back to the home screen. I saw something then. It was a video file, and it had its own little collection inside an app. I clicked on it and found that it was 7 videos altogether, each of them titled Room 106. That was weird. I'd never seen files organized on a phone like that, but I decided to click on the first one and see if maybe it would give me some clue as to who I could bring the phone back to. The video opened with someone pulling up to the same motel I had come to at dusk. They were talking about how they'd been driving for ages, and they were glad to have finally found a place to lay their head. I'm only making this video because I've had the weirdest sense of deja vu, and I just want some kind of evidence in case something happens. I could swear I've been in this motel before. I felt that way ever since I saw the sign, and as empty as it is, I don't want to get trafficked by the cartel or something and not have somebody know that I was ever here. My name's David Lancaster. My birthday is 2/3/89. And I swear I've been driving between Vegas and Arizona for a couple of days now. Maybe this is some X-Files shit or something, I don't know, but I swear to you, I've been to this motel before, even though I've never seen it in my life. David pulls up outside the motel and gets out, being sure to hold the camera out so that everyone who might be watching can see the sign, the rooms, and the front desk area. You can hear gravel crunch under his feet as he walks towards the desk, pushing open the door and looking around. It's empty, just as empty as it was when I got there, and David yells "hello" a couple of times and rings the bell before he notices the key sitting on the counter. That's weird. Why would they just leave a key sitting here? Oh well. I guess maybe I'll stay in room 106 and then maybe head out in the morning. I'll leave him my credit card here with a business card underneath it. That way, when whoever it is gets up and realizes that I took the key, they can run my credit card and maybe get me for the rest of the morning. I wouldn't usually do this, but I'm so goddamn tired and I just don't think I can keep my eyes open another minute. David takes the key and heads past a couple of doors before he finds room 106. We see him go into the room, and by the way he's holding the camera, I start to think that he does this pretty often. He looks like a guy who vlogs while he travels, and the video is smooth and less jerky than expected. Room 106 is pretty standard. It's got a single bed, a sink with a microwave next to it, a bathroom with a shower and a toilet, and a TV sitting on top of a chest of drawers. It's the kind of hotel room that you could find at any side of the road lodging, and David comments that it looks cozy. He flips on the lights and discovers it's this weird mood lighting that makes the whole place kind of look like a fish tank. He goes to the sink and washes his hands, setting the phone up so that it'll see him while he washes, but he keeps looking back into the mirror as if he can see something moving. David seems paranoid, and I wonder how much fun he had in Vegas exactly. Finally, he dries his face and goes to the door as he puts the chain up, and makes sure that it's locked. Think I'll take a shower. I don't want any of you guys peeking at me, so maybe I'll leave it facing the door so you guys can keep a lookout for me. I saw him set the phone up on the wash basin, and after a few minutes, I heard the shower start running as he cleaned himself. I had set the phone into a little cradle that I would have usually used for my GPS, and between flicking my eyes back towards the road, I watched the room as the shower ran. As I watched, the chain began to take itself off the door, slowly but deliberately. It was as if someone had hooked fishing line to it, and they were pulling it out of its slot until it came to rest against the wood. Then the lock on the door slowly turned as if fingers fumbled at it. Once the locks were disengaged, the door creaked open slowly as something dark and sinister crouched in the threshold. It moved into the room like a throbbing miasma, and the closer it got, the more static appeared on the video. It got closer and closer, until there was nothing but fuzz amongst the static. I could hear someone scream, and then suddenly I was looking through the front windshield of a car as someone pulled up to the motel. I'm only making this video because I've had the weirdest sense of deja vu, and I just want some kind of evidence in case something happens. I could swear I've been to this motel before. I felt that way ever since I saw the sign, and as empty as it is, I don't want to get trafficked by the cartel or something and not have somebody know I was ever here. My name is David Lancaster. My birthday is 3/89/2, and I swear I've been driving between Vegas and Arizona for a couple of days now. Maybe this is some X-Files shit. I don't know. But I swear to you, I've been to this hotel before, even though I've never seen it in my life. I had to look at the video timestamp to make sure it hadn't simply repeated itself. A quick tap showed me it was still about 45 minutes in. Whatever they'd been shooting had continued on, but time had somehow looped. He was pulling up to the motel again, and the sun was just beginning to set behind it, just as it had been in the original video. I watched as he got out, walked up to the front desk, saw the key, and talked about how he was going to leave his credit card and his information behind. He went to room 106, still commenting on how creepy it felt here, and locked the chain and the bolt behind him before going to the sink and washing his face. He set the phone down a little differently this time, not really setting it where you could see him, but setting it to where we could see the back of the room. That was the only reason I saw what was making him so paranoid. It was this odd little static blip, these blink and miss it kind of moments, but it appeared that something was moving in the space behind him. It wasn't something I could catch. Trust me, I tried to pause the video a few times to catch it in frame, but it was definitely human-shaped, or at least human-adjacent. It flickered in the corners of the room, and I could swear a few times that it was by the ceiling before he turned around and it seemed to stop. Kinda want a shower, but I'm so tired. Maybe I'll take one in the morning before I head out. He set the phone down on the nightstand, seeming to forget that he was recording at all, and as it looked at the ceiling, I saw the lights dim and heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing as they burrowed down under the cheap motel covers. He got comfortable, and as he began to snore, I heard the same sound I'd heard while he was in the shower. Chains creaked menacingly as they were drug across the block, and then the bolt snapped like dry fingers as someone popped it open. I didn't see what got him, but as the darkness enveloped the lens of the camera, it snapped back again, and suddenly I was right there before dusk, watching him pull into the motel yet again. I'm only video because I've had the weirdest deja vu. and I want some kind of evidence in case something happens. I could swear I've been in this motel before. I don't want to get trafficked by the cartel or something, and I swear I've been here before. My name is David Landbaster. My name is 98932, and I swear I've been driving between Arizona and Vegas for a couple of days now. X-Files shit, I don't know. But I swear to you, I've been to this hotel before, even though I've never lifed before in my scene. I was having trouble focusing on the road now because the video was just so damn weird. Surely this couldn't have actually happened to somebody. This was somebody's student project that they'd shot on a phone camera to make it look a little more authentic, or some kind of weird AI project. There was no way in hell that any of this was real. I had been to the motel, I'd seen the place, and yeah, it had felt a little creepy, but it hadn't seemed like some kind of Freaky Friday sort of nonsense. The weird, distorted intro lines made me think that the one before it had been a little off too, and it was like the yellowing and jumping of an old VHS tape. The whole video lasted about 3 hours, and in those 3 hours, I watched the darkness get this guy every single time. Sometimes he would go to the bathroom, and it would make its way in, as it always did. Sometimes he would go to bed, and it would get him there. Sometimes he would wake up as it was coming in, and we'd get a great one-sided fight scene where he would scream and punch at the darkness before he fell into it, and it took him right back to where he'd been before. A couple of times he would walk in and turn the TV on, and the darkness would simply flow out of the set and drag him in before it reset. The longer it went on, the less of himself he seemed to be. The intros got shorter and shorter. The amount of talking he did got less and less, and by the end he was just sort of bumbling and going through the motions. He would walk to the front desk like a zombie, take the key without even leaving any information. And the second to last time he was taken by the darkness, he just sat on the bed and seemed to wait for it. It was as if he knew what was coming, and he'd consigned himself to oblivion. The next time it started, he mumbled something about déjà vu and being tired before getting out of his car and dropping the phone in the parking lot. It recorded as he walked away for a few minutes, the gravel crunching as he went between car and office, and then to the motel room. And then it suddenly stopped recording. I'm not quite sure what to do with the phone now. Do I turn it into the police? Do I take it somewhere else so somebody can have a look at it? If it's somebody's idea of a short horror film, then it's pretty good, but I get the feeling this is a little more personal than that. There are 12 rooms at the motel, and I wonder how many people are stuck in a loop like this in one of them. It could have just as easily been me. The key was there, an open invitation, and I'm lucky that I'd gotten that prickly feeling and walked away instead. I found the motel I was looking for about 2 hours later, but it's the damnedest thing. I was sure I'd been driving for days, but the calendar on my phone says I left Vegas about 3 hours ago. My gas gauge says I haven't gone farther than about 200 miles, and I'm not sure what happened as I drove through the Nevada desert. The motel I stopped at was nice. The man behind the counter was polite and got me set up for the night so that I could get some rest. But as I lay here in my motel bed, I can't stop thinking about that weird phone. What's more, I can't stop thinking about that weird motel either. The one that I was almost a victim of. As little as I want to. Maybe one day I'll find myself there again and find out what lies behind the door in room 106 for myself.
Sure you won't make your own reservation sometime very soon? Coming up next, we have a story about a man who's going to stay at a hotel in the intention of either finding that which was lost or dying in the attempt. So let's hear a story about if walls could talk.
If walls could talk, Joshua mumbled under his breath as he walked through the ancient old arches of the hotel. Approaching the wide check-in desk was like stepping back in time, but the image was ruined by the girl with her phone out and her AirPods stuffed in her ears. She was smacking her gum and perusing Face Space or Tic Tacs or whatever people her age did. Joshua hadn't really had time for any of that in a while. He hadn't seemed to have much time for anything these days. The girl at the desk looked young enough to be his daughter, and her smile was that perfect mix of customer service charm and barely masked indifference. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" Joshua looked up at her, and she must have seen something that spooked her in his hollow eyes, because he saw some of that indifference slip into something resembling concern. Not concern for him. That would have been a little too genuine an emotion to show a stranger. She was concerned that he might be a weirdo. She had clearly been warned about spotting weirdos. The hotel likely got its share of rent and ditchers or guys who wound up naked in the hot tub at 3 a.m., and she was on the lookout for trouble before it reared its head. The hotel manager likely had them keeping an eye out for these sort of weirdos who wanted to become permanent residents. If she saw that on his face, he knew he'd be screwed. Joshua tried to fix his face, but it was a struggle. "Checking in," he said, handing her his credit card and reservation paperwork. She looked at the paperwork as if the concept were foreign to her, before turning to the computer and clicking away at the register. He figured it was likely something that she didn't deal with regularly. The Leaser Moor was not some posh establishment, not some trendy spot that housed celebrities or jet-setters. It was an old hotel that attracted tourists and people who liked to bask in historic places. That's why Susan had come here, after all. She'd been here to photograph the hotel for a travel magazine, her 4th assignment as a freelancer, and her last. She pulled him up, and Joshua saw her bite her lip when the room number popped up. "Ooh, that's gotta be a mistake. Sorry, sir, but that room isn't one we usually rent out." "I'm aware. That's why I requested it." She looked shocked, like she didn't know what to say. "I hate to tell you this, but someone went missing in there pretty recently." She had pitched her voice low like it was a rat problem, or some mold that could have been steam cleaned out. Joshua wanted to be angry. He wanted to tell her that he knew someone had gone missing in there, and that 6 months and 5 days wasn't recent to him. 6 months and 5 days was when his world had crumbled, and it was a day he would never forget. He wanted to tell her that his wife had not been some rat infestation or a mold colony that could be cleaned, poisoned, or time erased. He wanted to tell her all these things in a flurry of anger and hatred, but he knew she wouldn't understand. "I've been informed. I like to stay in rooms like that and try to gauge paranormal happenings. It's a hobby of mine. Since I was in the city anyway, I figured I would take that room." The young woman sighed as she finished checking him in. "That's good. She just thought he was a weirdo." Weirdo was fine. A weirdo might set up some cameras, pull out a ghost box or an Ouija board, light some candles, and pretend to be a ghostbuster or a medium for a few days before leaving. One look at the suitcase probably told her that he had brought all his toys with him so he could play pretend, but she had no idea what games he intended to play. There was only one tool in that bag, and it wasn't for playing. "And you're all set," she said, handing him his key card. Please enjoy your stay at the Leaser Moor." Her smile was back, that fabricated grin that hid her disinterest. She just wanted him to leave so she could get back to Snapchatting or Twittering or whatever she was doing. She'd have something to tell her friends about tomorrow when she came in for her morning shift and heard about the mess he'd left in his room. Joshua pushed the button for the elevator and rode it up to the 7th floor. The hallway was done in that early 80s cinema style that made you think the floor was furry or sticky. The carpet pattern shifted in slightly nauseating diamonds as he walked down the hall towards his room. The thought that this would be the last thing he ever saw was a little disappointing, but that was reality. With any luck, his daughter wouldn't get his letter until Monday, not unless the post office near the college was feeling excessively ambitious. It would be too late for him to stop him either way. Joshua had laid out everything he needed to, explaining that he couldn't live without her mother, and that if her spirit resided somewhere in this room, he wanted to be with her. She could have his money, his savings, the car, the house, and anything else he owned, so she could finish school and make something of herself. All he wanted was Susan. He came to the door of room 712 much too soon, and as he slid the key into the lock, he glanced at the room where his wife had spent her last few hours of life. As the door came open, he was a little disappointed to find that it was just another bland hotel room. 2 beds, a dresser, an old TV that looked ready for the dump, a flimsy-looking chair, a nightstand that doubtlessly held a Bible, and the wall, whose color scheme sat somewhere between warm brown sugar and runny crap. Had this really been Susan's final destination? Had these uninteresting walls been the last thing she'd seen before leaving this room for the last time? Joshua set his suitcase down and took a seat on the bed, suddenly hoping not. Let her have seen the sights, taken a meal, and taken her final breath anywhere but here. The sun set outside the window as he sat on the bed, casting shadows across the room. As the darkness came to fill the empty space, Joshua became aware of strange patterns on the wall. The smears seemed to move as the shadows became gantries, and some looked eerily like faces. Suddenly the room was far too crowded, the multitudes watching him from the walls of the room, their judgment palpable. Joshua could hear the nightlife waking up, the people rumbling from the street below as the cabs and the music created a strange cacophony. He opened the suitcase and pulled out the gun, deciding that this would be a fine time to do it. Every minute he put it off was another chance for something to go wrong. It also gave his courage a chance to slip. If Kara got the letter and he couldn't follow through, he'd be spending the foreseeable future in a mental facility. Having to sit in the sterile room on a paper gown, orderlies medicating him to the point of catatonia, would be worse than death. As he set the cold barrel against his head, he whispered a final apology to Susan as his finger hovered over the trigger. "Stop!" It took every ounce of trigger control not to blow the top of his head off by accident. Joshua turned, his eyes growing wide as he recognized the face that had yelled at him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, a ghost or a manifestation, or maybe just a final mental break that would prove less supernatural and more existential. But he never expected to see one of the slightly expressive wall faces staring at him with panic. It reminded him of a mannequin's face, featureless and barely expressive. But as he watched it, it spoke again, and he heard the voice of his dead wife coming from the bland wallpaper. "Please, I can't watch you kill yourself." Joshua crawled across the bed, his shocked face locked onto the unremarkable one looking at him from the wall. Susan? The eyeless face stared at him as he got closer, and despite being devoid of anything remotely close to features, he began to see his dead wife's face beneath it. The scar on her cheek that she'd gotten in high school, the small nose he'd loved to kiss the tip of, the eyes that were slightly too close together, her lips that looked just as full and sensuous as they had before she'd left. The closer he looked, the more he saw. The more he saw, the closer he came. Is it you? It is, she said, the corner of her mouth pulling up as she studied him. It's good to see you. But how? He said, stuttering as he leaned off the bed, closer and closer to that wall of perpetual faces. I don't know, she whispered, her lips forming the words delicately. I woke up to see a face on the wall looking back at me, and as we stared at each other, it began to speak. He leaned in closer, slipping off the bed as his knees brought him closer to the spot on the wall where Susan's face lay. He asked what I was doing in his room, and after I explained that I had rented it from the hotel, he told me how he was staying here on a business trip when he had seen the faces as well. They all live here, Josh. Once I became part of them, I got to know them and heard their stories. They were all once people who stayed in this very room, people on vacation, people on business, people with families, people estranged, all seeking purpose in something and finding it here. Joshua crawled on his knees like a penitent before an idol, but his mind demanded caution. The other faces were looking at him, pushing against the wall like someone behind a thick plastic sheet as they tried to break free. Joshua could see their multitudes in the dim light from the window as they pressed and receded like a tide. Come closer, dear. It's hard to talk through this veil. He obliged, now halfway between the bed and the wall. He wanted to turn on the lights and take a better look at her face, but he was afraid that the light might ruin it. Hadn't he failed to see it until dark? He'd been sitting in this room for hours, waiting for the right time to join her. Now, here she was, coming to him in his time of need. Wait for me, please. I'll join you. I don't want to live without you, Susan. My life is meaningless without you. Can you take me where you are? Is there some way? I want to apologize, she whispered, and Joshua came a little closer as her words were lost in the blare of a car horn. You have nothing to apologize for. You didn't ask to leave me. I came here to join you, to see if your spirit lingered here and I could find you once I passed on. Kara's grown. She doesn't need me. But I need you. He was closer now, and if he had reached out, he could have almost touched that porcelain face. The live wire in his head, however, that ancient alarm that warns of danger, just wouldn't stop going off, and his hands trembled as he tried to make them reach. Not for that. I want to apologize for what I did while I was here. He felt his breath stick in his throat, his next words held in check as he waited for her to go on. In spite of himself, he crawled a little closer. When the faces woke me up, I wasn't in bed alone. I had gone to see the nightlife, to see the city, and as I sat in one of the trendy bars, I met someone. He was charming, a real ladies' man, and one thing led to another, and I let him convince me to take him back to my hotel room. I could blame it on the wine, But I know that wasn't all of it. I was bored, dear. I felt trapped by our life, smothered by what we had built. And that's why I agreed to the job in the first place. I wanted something new, something different. And though I didn't set out to find someone else, I ended up being untrue to you. Joshua felt the ice slithering into his heart, his lungs seething as his body shook with effort. He was drowning. He was suffocating, his body refusing to draw breath. How could she do this to him? This couldn't be true. Something was messing with him. This couldn't be his wife. She would never do that. She couldn't. Even though he was left breathless by her secret, his knees still carried him forward. Please say something. Can you forgive me? It was a lapse in judgment. I'm sorry. I don't care, he rasped. I don't care what you've done. I forgive you. I want to be with you again. His hands slid around the edges of the mask, caressing her face as he leaned in close. Please don't leave me. I can't live without you. He leaned his head against her mask and felt her perfect lips turn up in a smile. Then let us never be parted again, my love. He felt her lips twist into a smile, too large for a human mouth to contain. The corners tore, her cheeks splitting as her mouth opened wide like a snake. He didn't struggle as her mouth enveloped him, the face elongating as she pulled him in. He opened his eyes to see that her face had grown to take in the whole wall. Her features had warped into something akin to the face of one of the demonic statues you saw in churches sometimes, and it warped and tilted oddly on that flat plane. You aren't really my wife, are you? No, but I can take you to her. You'll find many of her friends inside the walls. I hate going into this room, Maria said, her cart making a strangely chuffy noise on the carpet as she and Loa came inside. Why? It's no different from any other room. It just always seems like something is watching me here. As she fixed the bed, Maria couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at the wall. Loa was wrong. This room was unlike anything in the hotel. The paint here always looked like faces, and the faces were always staring right at her when she came in to clean. As she looked at the wall, the paint looked thick in places, like a splash of blood left to dry. The faces leered at her from every corner, and she squinted a little as she noticed a new one. She cleaned this room once a day. The 7th floor was her assigned floor, after all, and she could have sworn that no face had been in that spot before. As she watched, it almost seemed to turn to her, the featureless face somehow regarding her. Hello? It rasped, its voice thick and coarse, but also inviting as it fell over her like a... Did you say something, Maria? Loa asked, and the little maid shook herself as she turned away from the wall. When she glanced back, the face was still there, but had become flat and featureless again. Let's get out of here, she said suddenly, taking her cart and pushing it towards the door. But we haven't cleaned the room yet, Loa countered, looking aghast as Maria beat a hasty retreat. Maria took the Do Not Disturb sign from behind the door and hung it on the knob. We can clean tomorrow. No one will bother this room if that sign's on the door. She was glad to see Loa coming behind her, but she glanced back at the face as it regarded her from the doorway. She prayed she would have the strength to turn away tomorrow, but she knew that someday her own face might look down from that same wall. Maybe it wouldn't seem like such a bad idea on that day.
A tragic tale of a tragic place. Coming up next, we have a story of a man just looking for a place to put his head for the night. Oh, and what a place he finds. Let's hear a story about not letting the bed bugs bite.
It's the little things sometimes. A good meal, a familiar song on the radio, a soft bed to sleep in after sleeping on benches or in sleeping bags for the past few years. The last one had been tainted for me after that night. I didn't think of myself as homeless. I had a beautiful house in Tampa, Florida, where my wife and my kids lived. I had access to the bay, a 2-car garage, a big backyard for the kids to play in. It also had my wife's new husband, the guy she married after our divorce. So, I'm not exactly welcome there. After the papers were finalized, I literally walked from the courthouse to a camping store, and after $400 charged to the credit card I shared with my ex-wife, I felt I had everything I needed to start a more carefree life. I thought I'd just live rough from now on, and to hell with everything else. I would ride the rails, take day labor, and just be an explorer in the modern age. That's what I thought of myself as, an explorer instead of just a vagrant. After doing that for about 5 years, I've learned a few things, and lost a lot of the crap I bought on that long ago day. I've learned which towns will ask you to leave and which towns will throw you in jail for public vagrancy. I've learned which day labor companies are willing to work with guys who sleep in alleys. I've learned the best way to get a shower and a shave in a public restroom without attracting attention. It's gyms. Gyms are the best for that. But above all else, I've learned that sometimes it's best to treat yourself when you can manage. That's what I was doing. I was trying to treat myself and get out of the heat for the night. I grew up in South Florida, so the heat is no stranger to me. I remember sleeping with the windows up, ceiling fan on, hoping for a breeze to rustle the curtains as I stuck to my sheets. The heat doesn't bother me like it does a lot of people, but this year had just been so hot. The heat was near constant, and I had rolled my sleeping bag up for the season and slept on a threadbare blanket on the ground most nights. I was in a rural area close to Alabama, one farm community with a short name and a small population. I spent my days unloading or moving freight at the train depot, and my nights trying to find a nice place to bed down. Sometimes I'd do day labor, sometimes I'd do odd jobs for people, but the police left me be for the most part, and I thanked them by not getting drunk and making an ass of myself. I was considering making this a regular thing, staying for a few months and renting a trailer at the Happy Acres Trailer Court, but then I got the word from Doris that they were downsizing a bit, and they couldn't really afford to keep paying me under the table. Doris was a sweet 55-year-old grandmother who was just trying to make it to retirement, and she told me that she was very sorry, but they were just going to have to let me go. I didn't really mind, I suppose. I took it as a sign that it was time to move on to somewhere else. Time to do some exploring farther north, maybe. It was getting close to harvest time, and there were plenty of little towns in Alabama or Georgia where a man could get farm labor work and bed in the barn or a bunkhouse. It was hard work, but it was good work. And I was hopeful as I took the small collection of cash that Doris had collected for me and set out on the road. That whole day, though, was the hottest day I had ever experienced. I hit the road about 8 a.m., and I was walking up the side of the highway by 9. It was the last week of July, and you could see the heat as it baked off the asphalt. The sun was high, and by 10 I was sweating as I prayed for a semi to come blowing past. It was little relief when one finally did, though. The air that buffeted into my face was like a giant exhaling on me. I thought longingly about the big fan running on the docks and how I could catch a long breeze between unloading and loading trains as I drove my forklift underneath it. By afternoon, I was miserable. My back felt like it weighed about 500 pounds, and the straps dug into my sore shoulders. I was in Alabama. I had stopped at the rest stop to use the bathroom at the border, but I was a good piece from Dothan, the closest big city. If I could get there, I could get some day labor, find a farmer looking for laborers for the season. I could even just pick up a job at a depot or as a fry cook or something, so I could afford to stay indoors until it was time to move on again. As I walked that first day, I even dared to dream that I might find something less temporary and make Dothan a long stop. I had grown up on a farm, picking vegetables and milking cows and taking care of horses, and the idea that I might get along with some farmer and become his stableman or his labor foreman was appealing. On the other hand, I was a lapsed accountant, too. I had worked for an office in Tampa and could easily get back with a place and make that my life again. I could get an apartment, have a stable job again, maybe even see my kids sometime if they wanted. Like I said, big cities are sometimes full of possibilities, and there's little else to do on the road but daydream. When night fell, I was squarely in the Badlands. For those of you unfamiliar with Highway 98, there's a stretch before you get to Dothan where there isn't much of anything but fireworks stands and little houses. There are occasional gas stations. Hell, there's even a really nice casino out there that no one ever goes to. But if you're on foot and seeing it through the headlights of passing cars, it can be a little spooky. The remains of abandoned houses that are slowly being reclaimed by the land look a lot like haunted houses when the lights of a passing semi suddenly bring them to life. The broken windows of a failing business seem to leer at passers-by as a minivan screams away from them. The heat was still baking up through the soles of my boots, too, and I was starting to wobble a little when I finally decided to stop for the night. It was 8, some pink still on the horizon, but the heat of the 12-hour walk had exhausted me. I had intended to move over into the nearby scrublands and try to find some respite from the hot evening, but when the lighted sign appeared at the bottom of the hill, I thought it might be Providence throwing me a bone. Eddie's Discount Motel rotated garishly on a sign out front, and I could see a little neon sign beneath it that read Vacancies. I had about $200 in the compartment in my backpack, and about $60 in my left sock. Depending on how much of a discount Eddie's rooms were at, I might find a nice bed for the evening. As I walked to the bottom of the hill, I started daydreaming again, thinking about the continental breakfast, a hot shower, maybe some HBO before settling into a real bed for the night. I could check out around 10 and be on the road again, maybe even making Dothan before dark tomorrow. I barely noticed the hot tar under my feet, or the arid blasts that flapped my coat when the cars went by. I was on my way to something better, I thought. When the lobby door opened, I sighed in ecstasy as the cool air hit me in the face. The lobby was dingy, and calling it so might even be charitable. The furniture was of the bus station variety, and there was a magazine sitting on one discussing the first term of Barack Obama. My daydreams about continental breakfast drifted away, and I approached the plexiglass booth that housed Eddie, I assume, with trepidation. Eddie was a middle-aged man, his thinning hair pulled back into a ponytail as his Pantera t-shirt struggled to contain him. Even through the glass, I thought he looked distinctly greasy, and he looked up from whatever he was watching on his laptop with some misgivings. "I ain't got any spare change, pal, and I don't let people just crash in my lobby." I rolled my eyes, this sermon being pretty common amongst people who've never lived rough. Actually, I was wondering if I could rent a room for the night. Eddie looked me over and his glower softened. "It's 30 a night. Checkouts at 10 a.m. Cash up front. No refunds for stains or bugs." He tapped the slot at the bottom of the plexiglass, indicating that I could drop my cash in there. I bent down and fished 2 20s out of my sock. They were wet with sweat, but money was money in this economy. 30 was a lot to pay for a few hours of respite from the heat, but the thought of sweating out in the woods for the night had changed my mind. Eddie grimaced at the wet bills, but he slid them under the counter and flopped a 10 and a room key back at me. "Take room 5. Don't forget, checkouts at 10 a.m. And don't steal my towels." Then he turned back to his laptop and forgot I existed. The room was somewhere between swanky and skanky. There was a bed with a sagging mattress and some sheets that were only slightly stained. A bathroom with a shower and a sad stained toilet, and a TV that looked like it had seen most of the Reagan administration. All in all, it was a shithole, but it was better than sleeping in the woods. The only thing I cared about was sitting under the big window, and when it started pumping out cold air at subarctic temperatures, I was glad that I had shelled out for the room. The shower was amazing, but it was also the first indication I got that something was off. I left my clothes on the floor and climbed into the hot deluge. My skin felt like I'd stepped into a heat bank for a few seconds, but it passed as the hot lava coursed down my scalp. How long had it been? How long had it been since I'd had a real shower? How long had it been since I'd stood in a real shower, slept in a real bed, watched TV, had it all to myself? My eyes snapped open, though, when I heard the click of nails on the linoleum. The rings of the Dollar General curtain almost screamed as I yanked it hard to the side. My first thought had been rats. This place was slummy enough to have them, but I didn't see anything. The floor was stained, but my clothes were the only thing on it. I looked at the door, but it was closed. No rat could have squeezed under that thing. I pulled the curtain back and had just started washing the day's sweat off of me when I heard it again. It was subtle, like claws on the lino, but when I looked at the curtain, I slammed hard against the cold plastic wall. My mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing and coming up short. It couldn't be what I was looking at, but I couldn't find any other way to explain it. The curtain was crawling with something big, something that looked like beetles. They were scuttling over the curtain, 4, 5, 7, 8, and as I slid into the ringed basin of the tub, I started hyperventilating a little. They were scuttling, their feet making the same clicking as they had on the bathroom floor. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel them. They glared at me through the curtain as the steam clouded around them. As the water fell on my head, I gasped in pain as the shampoo I'd been working into my scalp ran into my eyes. I wiped at it, not wanting to lose track of the bugs, but as my vision cleared, I was looking at empty space and the gauzy film of the shower curtain. The bugs were gone, out of sight, but not out of mind. I searched the room, probably looking ridiculous in my old underoos, but I never found anything. Well, except for the stains on the mattress. They were a little hard to miss. I had gripped the mattress when I saw the old red stains on the side. If you've never seen old blood, then you may not realize what it looks like, but I'd seen my fair share on the farm. This was old blood, probably years old, and I made a mental note to sleep on top of the comforter that night. There were sheets on the bed, but you can only expect so much from fabric. I put my clothes back on and tried to make myself comfortable. It was hard. Those big bugs were still fresh in my mind, and as I lay on top of the sheet, I couldn't help but wonder where they had gotten off to. Were they waiting for me to turn off the light? Were they just sitting in the drain in the sink? As some movie played in the background, I found my eyes staring into the corners of the dingy room. The corners were dark, despite the lights being on, and I felt something lurking there. I fidgeted restlessly on the bed as something scrabbled over my leg. I couldn't find anything when I lifted it up, though. I was being paranoid. What did I care if the room had roaches or beetles or whatever? Hell, I often slept next to dumpsters or out in the woods. Just because these bugs had startled me didn't mean that they meant me harm, right? Despite my better judgment, I got under the covers and tried to get comfortable. The mattress was lumpy, but not too bad. There was a definite divot in the middle, though, a person-shaped indent worn from multiple bodies over multiple years. It seemed to be my only choice for sleeping locations. It wasn't a chasm or anything, but it had an uncomfortable dip on either side. I finally found myself giving up and lying in it, and as my eyes started to slip shut, I felt the bite. It wasn't hard, a little less than an ant bite, but it snapped me out of my semi-sleep and made me throw the covers back to look. I checked the bed, the sheets giving away nothing, and I couldn't find any ants or spiders or anything. I thought about bedbugs then, and I pulled my jeans back to look at my leg. It was nothing, a little red spot, but as I tried to settle in again, I felt another bite. It was followed by a third, a fourth, a fifth in seconds. I could feel something on my skin, little feet running up my legs, and the bites were painful. I rolled up my jeans and swatted at my legs, but there was nothing there. It was as though whatever had bitten me had just taken a chomp and left just as quick. I was back on the comforter in a flash, but the divot felt tainted. I sat to the left of it, shoulder against the wall as I put my back to the headboard, wishing I had just put up with the heat. I could just leave, I thought. This was America, after all, and if I wanted to waste my money, then that was my business. The thought of going back out and sleeping in the woods, the heat falling over me like a blanket, was not at all appealing, though. I didn't like the thought of bugs crawling on me either, especially not bed bugs. Growing up, my parents had been fond of keeping dogs in the house, and I could remember spending nights with fleas crawling all over me as I sweated beneath my sheets. We had bed bugs a few times as well, and I remember the sleepless nights spent as they crawled and bit at me. It had led me to be very neat, something that persisted even into my homelessness. and it was almost funny that I hadn't felt truly dirty until coming inside somewhere for the night. It wasn't a big problem, though. Bugs didn't like cold, and I had the AC set on about 65. I could sleep on the comforter, avoid the worst of the bites, and still enjoy a nice cool evening indoors before returning to the heat tomorrow. When the power suddenly went out in my room, plunging me into darkness, I felt a small moan rise in my throat of its own will. I was left with nothing but my own breathing as I sat there on the saggy bed. The curtain window provided nothing but a ghostly inkling of a shadow light from the parking lot beyond. I crossed my arms around my chest as I began to shudder. The cold air hung around me like a cloud, but it would dissipate before long. Then, well, I might as well have just slept outside. The heat was oppressive, but at least the bugs were a little less forward. As I sat in the dark, I felt like I could hear the scuttling again. It was clicking, the noises scuttling across my brain. I looked around fretfully, trying to see where they were coming from. I wanted to run. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but I just couldn't make my legs move. My eyes were roving in a panic when I saw the comforter begin to flutter. The divot made a little canyon in the bedclothes, and I could see something squirming up from that hole. They were big, looking like beetles from a kid's cartoon, and they came staggering up from the crater as they ruffled the comforter. They spread out as they searched for me, and I felt my horror growing as the waves began to flow my way. They were like a squad of army ants, making their uniform patrol as they looked for prey, and they were coming towards me. I did the only thing I could think to do. I got up and made a run for the door. I made a grab for my pack, but my fingers slipped off the rawhide loop at the top. I paused in the doorway, turning back to grab it, and that's when I saw them. The bugs on the shower curtain had been babies compared to these bloodsuckers. They were as large as dogs, their amber bodies clicking as they moved, and their piss-yellow eyes full of hate. They came lumbering after me, their proboscises quivering with anticipation. I slammed the door as I left the bag to them. I had a fleeting thought that I had left the room key on the nightstand, but that hardly mattered. I wouldn't have gone in there for $200,000, much less the $200 in change that was left in my travel sack. That's how I ended up running up the interstate towards Dothan with nothing but the clothes on my back and $10 on my sock. I must have looked pretty silly, but I didn't care. I was glad to be out of there, glad to be in the muggy air again, happy to have escaped with my life. And when the man in the farm-all truck came and picked me up a half an hour later, driving me the rest of the way to Dothan, I was glad to be able to feel the breeze that ruffled my hair. It felt better than Eddie's air conditioning ever could. Whenever I get the wanderlust again, I just think back to that night 3 years ago, and I count myself lucky to have gotten out with my life. It turned out that Dothan was some of the things I had been looking for, and others I hadn't even thought about. I found work. I found a place to stay that wasn't a park bench, and when the farm I got hired to pick pecans at was out of pecans for the season, the farmer was already having me work on his books to get him and his finances back in order. I moved into a little rental on the land, and I'm glad to say that my wandering days are over for now. I put this story here as a warning to those who still wonder, though. Eddie's prices may seem like a good deal, but watch out for the things you get on top of the bed and the TV. Those bed bugs have teeth, and you may end up as just another stain on the mattress if you aren't careful.
So next time you're traveling abroad and staying somewhere different, be sure to check the sheets. Coming up next, we have a story about a man traveling to a foreign country who falls in with a crowd intent on showing him more than local color. Let's hear a story about the sacrifice.
It was my first time backpacking in Europe. I say first because I've been back a few more times. I love to hike, but more than that, I just like going places. If you're not a big hiker, then it might not make sense, but sometimes I like to feel like Frodo as I make my way to Middle-earth to get rid of a ring. Sometimes I'm with people, sometimes I just go by myself, but nothing beats the feeling of seeing the world on your own two legs in a backpack, full of whatever you could cobble together at the time. Europe is a pretty great place to backpack in general. It's very accommodating, and most of the places you'll want to go to have a hostel where you can stay for cheap. You never know what kind of people you're going to see there either, which has led me to sleeping with my backpack and splurging on a small padlock for any of the zipper pockets it might have. I don't want people rifling through it. Most of the people you meet are fine, other backpackers, tourists, travelers from one place or another, but you do encounter drug addicts sometimes and the mentally ill, so it's best to come prepared. Backpacking teaches you to sleep lightly, how to travel light, and how to pace yourself so you don't burn out on the side of the road after a full day of traveling. Something else that backpacking and hiking taught me was how to read a map. After my first hiking experience, I never traveled anywhere without a clearly defined map again. I'd been hiking in Europe for about a month. The first time I went, it was one of the hostels where I met a group of young men who said they were from Germany. They were hiking around on the border between France and Germany, and they were going in roughly the same direction that I was, so I decided that I'd go with them. They kept talking about this quaint little town that they wanted to visit, and they said I should come with them because it was something to be seen. It was coming up on December, and it was really starting to get cold. Too cold for serious hikers. I'd meant to be back in civilization for the colder months of winter, but I'd found myself following these three fellows for longer than I meant to. They assured me that they did this often, and that the place they were taking me was something to see, so I decided to go with them. What the hell, right? You only live once. Can't tell you where the village is, mostly because I'm not really sure myself. The guys I was traveling with knew more about the region than I did, and I wasn't as good at map reading back then as I would become. Also, they had a pretty good amount of alcohol with them, and they were not adverse to sharing it. They kept me fairly sloshed most of the way to wherever we were going, and looking back, I wonder if their intentions were entirely friendly. I was too drunk to think about it at the time, but I remember catching them talking in that hurried German that I was never able to really follow as they looked or pointed at me. I know a little German. I'd be a fool to travel through Europe without knowing a few pieces of the language, but my German wasn't as good as my French, and my French is nowhere near as good as my Spanish. I tell you this so that you'll know that I picked up a few words, but I was never what you would call fluent in the language that they kept slipping into and talking about me. I remember it was December 1st when we made it to the village. I only remember that because it was one of the guys' birthdays, and they made a big deal about it at breakfast, so I guess it stuck in my head. It was just before lunchtime when we came to the border, and it was like stepping into a time machine. This would have been around 2001, 2002, so it was still what you would consider to be modern times, but the people I saw working the fields looked like they might be from the 1800s or something. They were plowing their fields with oxen, turning down the old growth as they got the field ready for planting next year. They were dressed in homemade dresses and hand-stitched overalls, the women sporting actual bonnets. They looked up as we passed, and I saw a few of them hold their children tight, like they thought we might try to steal them. The kids were in a collection of clothes that made them look like miniature adults, and it reminded me of visiting the Amish country when I was a kid. We came into the village, and it looked like something from a postcard. Everything was all cobblestones and handmade bricks and glass that looked like it had been made by an artisan. They drew their water from a well, and there was an honest-to-God market in the middle of the square where people were selling their wares. I saw an awful lot of pine boughs and decorations, and I wondered if we had arrived in time for some sort of festival. I asked one of the German guys, and he nodded and said, yeah, a lot, before turning back to his friends and continuing to talk in that low, quick German. The only word I kept catching that day was special and barter, but I didn't really understand. There was another word, safe passage, but it made even less sense. We were heading not far in, but there was a large house in the middle that had to be a meeting hall or a town hall. People were getting out of the way, looking at us like we might have a disease or something, and I noticed 2 of my friends had gotten behind me as if they thought I might try to make a run for it. There was no chance of that. I was absolutely enchanted by the place. It was like slipping into some German fairy tale, and I was taking pictures with my disposable camera and waving at people like an idiot. That German fairy tale analogy would come back to me later, and I would come to understand how fitting the comparison had been. We walked into the town hall, or meeting hall, or whatever it was, and I saw a handful of people clustered around a large wooden chair by the fire. There was an old man sitting on that chair, his legs hiked up over the armrest, and one of them looked like it was twisted from a fall or something. He seemed to be holding court, like he was a baron or a burgermeister or something. And as my new friends came up with me to the old man, he told the crowd to depart and pointed at us. My new friends bowed to him, dipping their heads low, and pointed to me as they started talking in that quick, fast German again. I picked up on the word safe passage, and then they said another word that I recognized, something that meant offering. I got a little nervous then. I'd heard stories about human trafficking and drug trade, but you never think that you're gonna be involved in something like that. It's such a picturesque German village, after all. The old man looked at me briefly, his face scrunched up in indifference, and then he said something to the 3 men, and I picked up a little bit of it. He told them they had arrived too late, and something had already been selected for something. Then he said some other stuff, and the general tone was that they were welcome, but he couldn't do anything for them. The 3 men deflated, looking bummed out, but not altogether upset. They looked like kids that had come in second place in some contest, and when one of them turned back to me and clapped me on the shoulder, I felt a sense of relief somehow. He says we're welcome, and we're more than welcome to stay for the festival if we like. I told him that sounded great, and the whole atmosphere shifted after that. The old man came out on the front porch, slow under the power of one slightly twisted leg, and told the people that we were welcome and that we had his blessing to stay for the celebration. The people cheered, and we were immediately welcomed in a way that I'd never experienced before. It was like someone had flipped the switch in them, and suddenly all 4 of us were being patted on the back and having our hands shook and our necks hugged. They gave us food and shelter, fresh clothes and baths, and when they served dinner in the square, we were placed near the head table in a spot of honor. There was a lot of dancing, the whole town really turning out for whatever this was, and when I asked one of the guys what we were celebrating, he smiled and seemed to think about the best way to explain it. This is, and then he said a word that I didn't have any hope of understanding, before he added, the celebration of tribute. It is a yearly rite that the people undertake, and when they leave offerings to the new year, so that their crops will be good. Offerings, I asked, as I took another sip from my beer. Like animal sacrificing? I didn't think anybody still did that. Oh, yes, the man said, and he nodded solemnly. There are many people in the surrounding area who still keep to the old ways. This village is one of them, and it is the reason that they still live in this manner. There is no electricity, there's no technology, there is no mass production or preservation. They live simply, and as such are protected from the horrors of the outside world. I didn't fully understand what he was talking about, but the food was good, and the celebration was something to be seen. I danced with a few dozen village girls. I was invited to sing a few times with the band. I was given food and drink till I thought I might burst, and I'd be lying if I said a couple of those girls didn't follow me to bed by the end of the day. It was an amazing time, probably one of the best trips of my life, but there was one person who did not appear to be having a good time. She was hard to miss. She sat beside the old man at every feast, and her stark white dress stood out against the rough spun and leather that the others wore. She didn't seem to eat much, even though I heard the village elder coaxing her in a less than friendly voice. She mostly just sat there, with her hands in her lap, and stared disinterestedly at her plate. I asked one of my new friends who she was, and when he looked at her, his smile slipped right off his face. She is the bride of Winter. I didn't know Winter had a bride, I slurred, mostly drunk when I plucked up the courage to ask. Oh yes, every year a bride of Winter is chosen, and then she is taken by the Green Man to be his lover for the year. What's a Green Man? The Green Man is the protector of the area, but he asks a high price for that protection. He's given tribute, he is given an offering, and he ensures the crops are good and the winter is mild. When the tribute or the offering is bad, the Green Man may be infuriated and send a blizzard down upon the village, which will kill or injure many of those who live here. They are always very careful what they leave and what they select to give to the Green Man, because his wrath can be quite deadly. I was too drunk to really process it at the time, and I just shook my head and laughed as I went back to whatever it was I'd been eating. It appeared I wandered into a group of superstitious peasants who were playing at South Seas Cannibals. Whatever, I was a guest, and I wasn't going to tell them how to run their village. We stayed there for a whole week, eating and drinking and making merry, and when Sunday came, we sat on the second story of the inn and watched a procession go off towards the church with the girl in white in tow. Her head was bowed and her hands were over her stomach, the poor girl leading the procession of villagers towards a large Gothic church at the edge of town. Not all of them went, though. I could see a small group of them building some sort of altar in the town square. They had large rocks, and they seemed to be trying to stack them in a vaguely geometric way. Once they had arranged them to their liking, they began putting food on them and other offerings. They left trinkets and baubles, animal pelts and trophies, food, drink, all manner of other things, but there was a large spot left open in the middle, and it seemed to be on purpose. I wondered who or what was going to go in that spot, but, of course, I think I knew. I think I'm going to go have a nap, I told my new friends at about 2 in the afternoon. You will miss all the festivities, one of them said, and he seemed genuinely sorry about it. I won't be asleep for long. Wake me up when they do whatever it is they're going to do down there. I don't want to miss it. I had been wrong on that account, and I was too foolish to know it. I slept later than I meant to, and when someone shook me awake, it was past dark. I don't know how I had managed to sleep through whatever was going on outside, but as I came to myself, I heard a lot of screaming and a lot of moaning from outside the inn. Torches were burning, people were calling out to someone, and the whole atmosphere was like something you'd see in a house fire. It was one of my new friends, and he was shaking me and telling me that we had to go. He was looking over his shoulder like he expected the town to come after them, but it was just the two of us in the room that they had given us at the inn. Go? What do you mean? We have to go to the thing tonight, don't we? There will be no tribute tonight. She has run away, and no one can find her. We must go before he arrives. Why can't they just find another one? It is too late for all that. The girl has been cleansed and prepared for 7 days. They cannot take another tribute in time, and when he arrives and discovers that she is gone, he will be wroth. I nodded, not really understanding, and got my stuff together. We went downstairs to find the other two sitting at the bar, fully packed and ready to go. They were drinking, but they looked anything but merry. They passed a mug of thick brown ale to me and told me to drink so that the cold wouldn't eat my bones. I took a few sips, more chewing it than drinking it, and as we prepared to go, I heard something different wash over the town. It wasn't something I heard, though that's the only word that makes any sense. The town went from a state of absolute cacophony to dead silent in a matter of seconds. It was as if someone had simply turned the sound off on whatever was going on outside. I remember snapping my fingers next to my head to make sure I hadn't gone deaf. All three of them jumped and looked at me like I was insane, telling me to get down below the window and not make a sound. I asked them why, asked them what was going on, but they said it was too late and that he had arrived. We had to get low, and we could not be seen, or else we might not make it out alive. I tried to ask them what the hell they were talking about, but one of them put a hand over my mouth and shook his head. That's when I became aware of the only sound in the world at that moment. That's when I heard it. The light, almost playful hoofbeats of a large horse. It came slowly up the road outside the hotel, taking its time, absolutely in no hurry. Whoever was riding it did not seem to be in any rush, and beneath the sound of hooves, I could hear the light, irritating sound of metal scraping together. Was someone sharpening a knife? It sounded like two pieces of metal rubbing together. But when I made to look out the window, my new friends pushed me down and put a finger to my lips. The horse passed right in front of the hotel, and when it was gone, I was still not allowed to get up. One of them whispered to me that if he saw us, we would all die, and I decided to take his word for it. I was suddenly terrified, a deep cold making its way across my bones and skin that went far deeper than frostbite. It felt like I'd been trapped out in the cold for hours, and I'm not sure I could have stood up if I wanted to. I heard the horse as it came to a stop in the center of town, and when I heard the old man speak to someone, I was chilled again at how absolutely terrified he sounded. "My lord, you honor us with your presence." He sounded as if he were anything but honored. He sounded as if he were absolutely about to wet himself. When whatever it was spoke, I felt like the stew I had eaten for lunch might be about to turn to concrete in my stomach. The voice was like something coming up out of a well. It was a deep, resonant tone, cultured but feral, something you heard out of the pits of hell on a quiet night. "Where is my tribute?" "My lord, the girl was young and foolish. She has run into the woods and we cannot find her. I apologize. You know how these children are. They do not understand the old ways, and so often The horse's hoof came down a single time, and the village elder was silent. "I will ask again. Where is my tribute?" The village elder was silent for a long heartbeat, and when he answered, I was impressed by his resolve. "She is gone, my lord. I offer myself as tribute, if you will take me. Please, I beg you, spare our village. These people have done nothing wrong, and they should not have to pay for the faithlessness of children." I heard something come free of his scabbard, a loud, angry kiss of metal as it escaped its holder. I imagined it was a large sword, but as I found my legs and peeked up over the rim of the window for the briefest of moments, I saw it was an axe. There was a man dressed all in mossy green armor, sitting atop a skeletal horse that was bigger than any horse that emaciated had a right to be. He had his back to me, his helm beset with deer antlers, and the old man who was their chief was standing before him as if this was a battle he meant to fall in. He had dropped his cane, and the twisted leg must have been hurting him badly. Regardless, he stood strong before the man, and as my friends pulled me back down below the window ledge, I heard a sound like a butcher's cleaver going through meat. Then came the sound of that said meat hitting the ground, and it wasn't alone. He reared up on the back of that horse, loosing a frightening cackle as he began to cut into the others that were assembled there. He sliced them with that cruel axe, but before that I heard a winter blizzard hit the windows so suddenly that I fell backward onto the floor. The windows were covered in a thick frost in a matter of seconds, and amidst the screams of the townspeople who had gone to stand with their elder, I could hear the whipping, biting wind as it hit the side of the inn, hard enough to rock it in its frame. My new friends and I scrambled across the floor, trying to find shelter before the windows burst. We found the entrance to the wine cellar, and as we stumbled down the stairs, we pulled the door shut behind us. Despite our cover, the slaughter went on outside. I couldn't hear it, not over the wind, but we could see it the next day. Whoever their patron was, he was cruel indeed. We spent that whole night shivering in the stone cellar amidst the casks, and when daylight peeked out through the windows at street level, we decided it might be safe to venture out. It took several tries to get the front door open, but when it finally came loose of its icy hinges, we could see that Main Street was covered in frost. Not just frost, thick black ice that would have looked more at home on the pavement of any American city during this time of year. Some of the bodies we found had been cut down, but some of them had simply crumpled to the ground and been frozen where they lay. The old man had been cut in half, his top half frozen onto the altar, in the spot where the tribute would have stood. I'm sure some of the people lived, but all those we found that day were dead. They had been hacked apart, or ridden down, or simply died of exposure. And my new friends told me that we needed to leave before the townspeople that were left came looking for retribution. Retribution? We didn't do anything, I told them, as we made our way out of town. It doesn't matter. We're outsiders. They will not care if we cause the Green Man's fury or not. They will want to make sacrifice to him, so it doesn't happen again. And the outsiders always go first. We left town in a hurry, and when we made it to another little village near the border of France, they took me to the train station and told me to make my way back to civilization. They apologized for taking me to the village, saying they should have known better. They wished me safe travels, and when we parted ways, I never saw any of them again. Never really wanted to after that night. I wonder how close I came to sitting on that altar and being a tribute that was given to the Green Man. It's made me wary when I hike, and a little more cautious about the company I keep. Also, I don't hike in the winter months anymore. Feeling the cold on my skin and smelling the frost in the air always makes me think of that little village where so many people died, and it makes me wonder if the Green Man might be stalking me still.
One more story for you, and then I think it's time for us to part ways once again. But I've saved a pretty good one for last, I think. This story is about a place discovered after dark, a place that calls to those who find it, a place that could be your home forever. Let's hear a story about Serene Meadows.
I've been looking at those lights every day since I took the job. I work overnight at one of those big warehouses. It's not an Amazon warehouse, but it's similar. They do a lot of off-brand furniture and things, and me and a couple of other guys work overnight loading trucks. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me fed and my bills paid. It's a 10 to 6 kind of gig. You bring your lunch and eat during one of your smoke breaks, but as long as the trucks are loaded by morning, the bosses don't really care. All that preamble was to tell you that the lights are something I've wondered about since the first night I came to the warehouse. It wasn't much, just a little string of lights in the woods beyond the road, but it took my attention off the playlist I was listening to. It was beyond some trees, maybe 100 feet into the woods, but I wondered what could be back there. Was it someone's workshop? Was it some housing development? Weirder still, maybe it was a government facility or some kind of haunted, wooded area. I thought about it all shift and caught myself looking at the woods on the way home, though I couldn't see the lights in the daytime, of course. I dreamed about them that night. I didn't know what the lights were, but I dreamed they were twinkling in the woods as I sat beside the roadside. It reminded me of the lights on my light bright from when I was a kid. Sometimes I would set up the paper and just fill it with the white bulbs and pretend it was a field of fireflies, the ones that came in the spring and summer. I would sit on the back porch for hours when I was a kid and watch them until my mom made me come inside. That's what they looked like to me. And the longer I looked, the more they danced. That night, as I drove past the lights again, I resolved to ask somebody about it. "What do you guys know about those lights in the woods?" I asked, the three of us sorting and loading boxes into tonight's truck. Andre and Kevin looked at each other, pausing for a moment in our nightly drudgery. "The lights along 45 East?" Kevin asked, clearly hoping I was talking about something else. "Yeah," I said. "Why, are there more lights?" Andre laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, that ain't nothing. It's just some lights out in the woods. Nothing to worry about." We loaded a little more cheap furniture as I chewed it over, but I still found myself curious about those lights. "But what is it?" I asked again, and the two of them sighed. "It's nothing," Kevin said. "Don't worry about it," Andre said, but they clearly knew more than they were saying. "What's the big deal?" I asked. Why don't you just tell me?" "Because it's nothing," Kevin said, wincing as he dropped the box he was carrying. "And you shouldn't be looking for nothing," Andre added, his face looking like maybe he had said too much. I didn't bring it up again after that, but it was never far from my mind. For 3 weeks, I watched those lights, and then I dreamed about them every morning as I slept like the dead. Then, one night, as I drove past the lights, I couldn't hold my curiosity anymore. I'd driven by an access road that I believed would take me to the lights for nearly a month, and that night, the call was just too great. There was no guard post, no fence, no barbed wire, no nothing, and I figured it couldn't be dangerous if they weren't trying to protect it. So instead of driving to work, I turned down the access road and drove into the woods. Stupid, I know, but I had to know. If it really was a forest full of fireflies or just some redneck solar lights, I suddenly had to know. When I drove under a sign that sat high above the road, I had to back up and read it. "Serene Meadows," read the sign. "A charming community." I was standing in the road, trying to read it in the headlights of my car, when my phone rang. It was Andre, and I killed the engine and sat in the car as I picked it up. He wanted to know where I was and why I wasn't here to unload boxes, and without much thought, I put on my best hoarse, sore throat voice that I could manage. I had only planned to have a quick look, but now I needed to know more. "Shit, sorry, Andre. I just woke up. I've got some kind of crud, man. It's laid me out today. I just need a day, man. I want to shake this off so I don't bring it to work." He was quiet for a moment, and I got the feeling he was listening to something. "You sure you're at home?" I blinked at the phone. Andre had never been suspicious of anything and didn't even really want to know why we were loading trucks in a warehouse in the middle of the woods. But he sounded different today. It sounded like he was trying to catch me in a lie, and it almost made me want to come clean with him. Almost, but not quite. "Course I am," I said, cobbling up a cough. "I just want to go back to bed, man. I feel terrible." "Okay, well, feel better. See you tomorrow night." "Yeah, of course," I told him. When I hung up, I actually sighed in relief. It felt like I had dodged something big, or like I hadn't been caught doing something I shouldn't be doing. I could see the lights getting bigger as I drove up the cracked and unmaintained road. No more than 10 minutes later, I pulled up into a very normal-looking cul-de-sac. Each house, and there were 7, was a different color. There was a blue one, a yellow one, a purple one, a red one, a white one, a green one, and a black one. And in front of each house was a blazing streetlight. Each house was a 2-story, with a large front and backyard, and a picket fence around the front of each. They were well maintained, the concrete of the road too, and it was strange to see something like this in the middle of the woods. This was what I'd been seeing all this time, a perfect little community, not that far from the road. As I parked and walked around the neighborhood, I expected to be stopped by somebody. The lights were on in the houses, and I figured someone would come to see what I was doing here. There were no cars in the driveways, though. Not even so much as an ATV in the shed. And when I peeked in the windows of the yellow house, I saw it was as empty as can be. All of them appeared that way. The lights were on, but no one was home. It was the strangest thing, just an abandoned subdivision left in the woods. But the longer I stayed, the less alone I started to feel. There was something about the encroaching woods around the houses, the way the trees leaned in, the way the shadows moved in the underbrush. I never felt in danger, but I did feel watched. It was like seeing shadows move for just a fraction of a second, and then slink away before I could get a good look. I finally got up the courage to try the door on one of the houses, after knocking for about 10 minutes straight, but it was locked. All of them were, it seemed, except the black house. I didn't really want to go into the black house. It seemed ominous somehow, but I did, and it was just like the rest of them. TV sitting off as it sat before the couch, kitchen in order, except the fridge was empty, and a dining room set for a meal. The upstairs had 2 small bedrooms and a large master bedroom with a bathroom. The bathrooms, one downstairs and 2 upstairs, were fully furnished, and the beds were made and ready for new owners. The whole place was a little freaky, but I kind of felt like the house had been waiting for me somehow. I know how that sounds, but I felt like I was supposed to be here, you know? And when I came back downstairs, I checked my watch and realized that I'd been exploring for 4 hours. It was pushing 10:30, and I supposed I should bail. There's probably some lazy security guard that would be by around midnight to catch me here. But as I drove out of the cul-de-sac, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. It was like leaving home, and I desperately wanted to turn around and go back. I had inadvertently given myself a 3-day weekend with my call-out, and when I got home, I stayed up playing games a little bit before heading to bed. I dreamed about the little community that night, just as I had dreamed about the lights before that. But this time, the dreams were different. I was standing in the master bedroom of the black house, looking down at the street as the streetlights burned brightly. As if on cue, the doors to the other houses banged open, and a parade of shadowy people came spilling out. They exited the houses in long columns, and as they approached the middle of the cul-de-sac, they congregated there, filling the street. The streetlights brightened, their almost eye-watering light becoming even brighter. There was a crackle of electricity, and all the shadow people were suddenly gone. I woke up then, gasping for breath, and wondered what the hell that had been. I went back to Serene Meadows that day, dreams be damned, and by daylight the place seemed very different. The cul-de-sac was pitted and cracked, the road nearly gone from the grass. The houses were still there, but they were peeling, and the windows were mostly broken or dusty. The doors were splintered, and most of them had been kicked in, but it was the street lights that seemed the saddest. The glass was broken, the lights shattered or missing, and the whole place looked like the woods would reclaim them at any time. I was perplexed. It was like a tornado had been through here, and a search of the houses found nothing but gutted rooms and graffiti everywhere. It looked like homeless people might have discovered the place way before I did, and I was glad I had worn boots. There were needles and cans scattered around, as well as a few blanket mounds and sleeping bags, but I didn't find anyone there. Whoever had been living there was long gone. I didn't know what had happened to the place. It had been fully intact the night before, and as the sun set, I got in my car and headed home. Looked like the kind of place I definitely didn't want to be after dark. The sun was dropping as I got back on the road, careful not to be seen by Andre or Kevin if they were heading to work. But as night settled over the woods, I saw the lights again and stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. I stared, not caring if anybody came along to beep at me. I'd seen the place. There couldn't be any lights coming from there. The houses looked gutted, the copper wire probably the first thing to go, and the streetlights were broken and shattered. Still, something made me turn around in the road and drive back to see who the lights belonged to. What I found was the same little community that I'd seen the night before. 7 perfect houses around a cul-de-sac, the streetlights burning bright and the road well maintained. As I sat there marveling at them, though, that was when I saw the first of the figures. With the lights on, they were hard to miss. Perfect shadow people, looking down on me from the windows of the upper floors. There were just a few of them at first, but the longer I watched, the more they piled up. Some houses only had a few, but others had dozens. As they began to fill the bottom windows too, I put my car in reverse and got out of there. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want to be seen by those things or find out what they would do to me. I drove like a bat out of hell, and when I got home, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I went to bed in my room, but the dreams seemed to be waiting for me. This time I was standing in the road. The lights were flaring, and the doors opened as they came spilling out. I was suddenly surrounded by a sea of shadow people. They were whispering something, whispering my name, and as they gathered around me, I saw the streetlights flare. I woke up to find I wasn't in my room anymore. I was on the bare wooden floor, the sunlight spilling through the broken windows of the black house. I was in the master bedroom of the black house, and by the daylight, it looked rougher than even I remembered it. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, but I knew an Uber wasn't going to come get me this far out. I'd have to walk the 7 or 8 miles back to town. If I wanted to get there before lunchtime, then I better get going. The way up the access road felt like it took years, and as I made my way to the highway, I sighed and started hoofing it. When a car pulled over to the shoulder, I wasn't surprised to discover that Andre was behind the wheel. "Looks like you're feeling better," he said, reaching over to pop the passenger side door open. "Climb in, bud. Let's talk." As we drove, Andre asked me if I had been to Serene Meadows. I couldn't lie, not as I was walking up the side of the road, so I told him that I had been. He nodded, said that he'd been afraid of that, and pulled into the parking lot of this little diner off the interstate exit. We got a booth, ordered food, and he told me what he hadn't wanted to tell me back in the truck when we were loading boxes for the day. "I've been there too," Andre said, sipping coffee. "Everyone who sees the lights has to go have a look. I saw it, but I'm guessing you've seen more than I have. I saw this pristine little development in the woods and turned back around as quickly as I could. I didn't want to get shot. This is the South, and a fella of my ethnicity who's skulking around after dark is likely to get a bullet in the head and a how-do-you-do later. B," he paused, sipping more coffee, "I saw the shadow people, and that sealed it for me. I was It was just a glance, nothing more, but that was enough for me. I've been loading trucks out there for about 5 years. Did you know that? It's decent work, and the pay's pretty good. In that time, I've seen people come and go, and usually it has something to do with those lights. Some of them just stop showing up. Some of them go crazy thinking about it. But it's like a drug when you get right down to it. You stop it for good, you stop giving it your attention, and eventually you kick it. That's how it was for Kevin, and that's how it'll be for you, too. I choked on my coffee. Kevin seen this, too? Andre nodded. Yep. He and I had a similar talk. Saw him walking up the roadside one morning after calling out from work. Asked him if he'd been to Serene Meadows, and he told me he'd been exploring, just like you. Did he wake up there after the dreams, I asked? And Andre nodded again. He didn't know how, but he woke up in one of those houses. Said he had dreamed about the shadow people. The house, as I think you know, only appears at night. By day, they just look like trash houses. But at night, it's the best little community in the woods. They look comfy at night, but I'll warn you flatly not to spend time there. I've known more than a few people who gave in to its call and simply disappeared altogether. One of them, a guy named Russell, told me he was living in the yellow house, the very same one Kevin woke up in. I looked at him shocked. He was living there? It's a squatter's shack. Why would he do that? Andre shrugged. He said that if he was going to keep waking up there, then he might as well start staying there. He was tired of the walk of shame afterward, and Andre shook his head, trying to find the best way to tell it. He said that the longer he stayed there, the more it resembled the house he saw by night. He said he saw the midnight procession as the shadow people went to the bright lights, and he said he heard them whisper to him as well. What were they whispering? I asked. Not really wanting to know, but needing to know. They were whispering for him, Andre said, and then one night, he just never showed up for work. I knew where he was, but I didn't go looking for him. He was gone, just like you'll be gone if you let that place eat you up. Do yourself a favor and leave it alone. Drink yourself to sleep tonight. Take a sleeping pill if you don't like to drink, but try not to think about that place. If you wake up there, just leave as fast as you can and call me. I'll come get you. If not me, Kevin will. If you can't do that, just come stay at my place for a few nights. I'll watch over you, like I did for Kevin, and we'll get you through this. You seem like a nice kid, but if you persist with this, then it will eat you up. Believe it. I agreed to crash at Andre's for a few nights, but I can't stop wondering where I'll wake up tomorrow morning. Even though it scares me, I can't stop thinking about that little community in the woods. What happened there to make it like this? What darkness lurks through there that makes even the homeless and the desperate leave it be? Most of all, I wonder if those shadow people are the people who tried to stay and were never seen again. As curious as I am, I hope I never find out. Knowing might be a great way to join that congregation one fateful night.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back Monday with more tales from Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.